Hello and welcome back to RP-0 America. So we've got, we're prepared to carry out, it's basically Gemini 8, so we'll be launching an Atlas Agena target vehicle from Launchpad Alpha and launching a Titan 2, this is Gemini number 5, from Launchpad Beta. So let's start with the target vehicle launch. So this was the first, Gemini 8 was the first successful, I guess I'm hoping to carry out Gemini 8, is the first successful docking, rendezvous and docking with the American hardware, because you have to do both. You can't dock if you haven't rendezvoused. Oh, weird that this is still holding up while we switch views. So it might be unsuccessful for all I know, but first we'll be launching this target vehicle, which is using very reliable hardware. Just kind of close some of that, saying, hey, you've built new things. Okay, and just make sure that is it in fact triggering for this mission. So let's see, first docking, launch a new vessel, good. Just wanted to make sure it was counting these as new vessels because I hadn't accepted the contract until basically right before I started the video. All right then. Yeah, there's a bunch of queued updates for our the whole stack, the realism stack that I haven't installed because I kind of wanted to record these videos before putting the time in to make sure those work. All right. So this is going to be, unless barring an engine failure, this should be a fairly straightforward launch. We just really want to get into a circular or circular-ish orbit. So we're using our kind of stock standard, the previous subassembly I built for an Agena D, and the just Atlas D for launching that. With the -5 engines, I think. Let me see, or -3, -5, the -5 and 6. Alrighty. Yeah. So this is kind of a useful precursor mission for a lot of other things. Really, if you can't successfully rendezvous in space, you're going to have a lot of trouble. If you can't successfully dock in space, you're going to have a lot of trouble in really any mission profile going to the moon. The only kind of even potential option for going to the moon that would not require rendezvous and docking would be a direct flight. So that would be an all-up stack. It is capable of launching from Earth, getting to orbit, sending itself towards the moon, getting into lunar orbit, sending itself down to the moon, returning to lunar orbit, and then returning back to Earth and returning the capsule safely, all with one vehicle, with no separations. So in contrast, say the Apollo and Saturn V, they were a little bit different. It was an all-up stack. Everything needed for a lunar mission was all put up in a single launch of a single Saturn V. However, it did, it achieved orbit of the moon. It did everything I said up to achieving orbit of the moon, and then at that point, they would, just a moment here, transfer the crew to a smaller vehicle, the lunar module, and then two, passengers would come down and pilots would go down to the surface of the moon. One stage of that lunar lander would return to lunar orbit, and the crew would transfer back to the command module with the service module remaining. They'd leave the LEM behind, and they'd return to Earth. So that's a lunar orbit rendezvous mission where everything is brought by one rocket to lunar orbit, and in the end they leave some hardware in lunar orbit, so they don't have to bring all the fuel to the lunar surface. All the fuel for getting a successful mission and getting back to Earth. So that is doesn't require any that required the docking in Earth orbit there. So the lunar module and command and service module CSM would have to successfully dock while they're coasting towards the moon, and then after the crew transfers over, goes down to the surface and comes back up, they would have to dock from scratch with the command and service module. All right, so we're approaching a point where I think it's about 6 Gs, 6.5 Gs where I usually dump this ring with this. It doesn't matter a ton, just because we're not trying to optimize to how much delta V we have once we get to orbit, which is kind of freeing, it's handy. We can just really dump this ring whenever we want to, when we feel like the orbital parameters are good enough. So there we go, I think that's good enough. And then we're just left with 2 minutes of burn time remaining on this engine. there's quite a bit, there's a lot of freedom there, but every second I burn with those engines more cuts off like many seconds, let's say 5 seconds or so of burn time with just this engine, because this one is more efficient and also has a lower thrust than either of those two engines. So there we go. And see, I may as well drop these fairing covers. I believe in practice, I could be wrong, but I believe the cover of the docking portion was retained until they reached orbit in practice. But yeah, the way we play in RP-0 and Realism Overhaul, really once you're kind of out of the atmosphere, or out of the vast majority of the atmosphere, like around 100 kilometers, it's generally okay to dump that. Just for a little bit of safety margin, I believe, because that's one of the few things that could kind of scuttle a mission. If the fairings come off and cause trouble, it's maybe better to dump them with 0G. And let's see. And also, even though the atmosphere is very thin here, so there's not a lot of force on this, there is a good bit of atmospheric heating. So if you want to protect the hardware underneath, you may as well leave the fairing on as long as you can before dumping it, because just the little bit of air you're hitting at this really high speed has quite a heating effect on the surface of your craft, whatever elements are exposed. All right, so we're not doing too bad at all here. I'm going to pitch down just a little because I want to aim for, like, ideally, let's say a 300 by 300 orbit. Unfortunately, I've forgotten a trick, so if anybody remembers this trick, you can let me know, or I might rediscover it in this. But I always find that MechJeb is really fidgety with kind of matching rendezvous. Like, once I have this craft in orbit, and then I get the Gemini into the exact same orbit with the exact same inclination and everything, I find it is a little bit fiddly for doing the Hohmann transfer to match their orbits, to get them to come to the same spot in their orbits at the same time. And there's a weird trick. Like, let's say if I get this to 300 by 300, then maybe the trick is that it's ideal to get the other craft to like 150 by 150, such that, say, its orbit doesn't overlap with mine, with the, say, orbit of the other craft doesn't overlap with this one at all. It might be an example of kind of the trick. But I don't remember. What I usually do is try to get their orbits fairly close, and then kind of go to MechJeb, but like just get them pretty close at launch. Basically once this engine is done this burn, it will be in orbit, and same with once the second stage of the Titan II that we'll be sending up next completes its burn, it will also be in orbit. And usually I try to get their orbits ideally exactly the same inclination, and ideally pretty close orbital parameters. Usually the vehicle I send later, I want to be on a lower orbit, which is part of why I'm targeting a higher orbit with this, so ideally say 300 by 300. So let me just give a quick look to the numbers. Yeah, it looks like it's fine. If I just kind of stay at this angle, should be good. We don't have very much time until we reach orbit, so I think we will end up having to pitch down a little bit. But yeah, I'm sorry, I just remember in some previous mission, someone told me the trick, or I figured out that trick, possibly while watching somebody else's video, and of course I've forgotten that trick. So if anybody remembers, just the ideal kind of orbits to get two vessels into in order to get MechJeb to do like a really easy Hohmann transfer. And I'll show you what that will be. Of course, if you're entirely unfamiliar with that process, fair enough, and I will totally do my best to show it off. But there's Rendezvous Planner, there's a bunch of options that will be in here once we have a target, and we have basically two vehicles in orbit. All right. So we don't have to be too picky with the inclination of this one. Really, I'm just kind of aiming down the 90, and I was aiming down the prograde earlier. The trick is we want to be a little more precise and fidgety with the vehicle that comes up next, because we want it to be as close to the inclination of this as possible. So to get a rendezvous, and of course also to lead to a docking of two craft, that's what I find to be the most crucial element, is to get them into the exact same inclination. Because say 0.1 degrees off, and that's going to cost you 5 to 10 meters per second of delta V to get them closer. And that doesn't seem like a lot until you realize how little delta V the Gemini has in total. Like, it has more than, it can do things that the Mercury couldn't, but it still doesn't have a ton of delta V, and you need to use some of that in order to perform the final rendezvous. So let's just level out. Looks like that's good enough. Looks like I pitched down just a little too much, but that's okay. We should be able to hit a fairly circular orbit here. So I'm just going to eye these numbers. They're going to flip. This one's going to, once this hits 200, and then I'm going to kill the engine. Yeah, it'd be nice to be able to do this programmatically, but I just haven't had the time to look at that program again. There we go. That's not too bad at all. And so the Aegina is a very good vehicle to use as a target for a number of reasons. One of those being that it has this engine, which has many ignitions, so it could actually inject itself a little bit higher, with another, say, half a second of burn or so, and it would expend 1 of 14 remaining. But it also has this auxiliary propulsion system, which I haven't modeled precisely as it was historically, but it's not bad. So let me just shut this engine down, because it's gonna. I wouldn't mind. It wouldn't hurt me to use the ignition. It's just gonna thrust more than I would expect. So then I can use. Come on, I want that. There we go. Just wanted that to go away. So now I'm going to thrust up. So see, this gives me a little bit of an oomph. Not too much, but it lets me kind of precisely adjust my orbit. And so I'm going to raise my orbit a bit. I'm not going to wait until, say, the other, until we get to apoapsis to adjust to bring up the periapsis. I'm just going to get this to about 250 and leave that, because we can do adjustments to this later on. In practice, I believe for the Gemini 8, this vehicle was taken to a very, very precise orbit, like 300 by 300 at the end. First perigee, first apogee, yeah, pretty close. 299.1, 299.7. So yeah, 250. That'll be good. That will be what I aim for. Launch date for this historically was. So this target was launched in March 16th of 1966, and it stayed in orbit until September 15th of 1967. So that gives you an idea that, even at a fairly, what seems like a fairly high altitude of 300 kilometers by 300 kilometers, the atmosphere still pulls you a bit, and ultimately ends up bringing you down, and that seems to me to be about a year and a half. All right, so we're approaching that 250. And we've still got plenty of hydrazine left in that this auxiliary propulsion system, but it's a really good. There we go. So it's a really good system, because I'll just turn this onto light puffs right now. But if you look, it's got jets in every direction. So I kind of changed it from a previous one. So now I could thrust backwards if I wanted. If I wanted to bring this down just a little bit, I can give it a puff in any direction to kind of change the orientation of the craft. And of course, I could do what I had just been doing in order to raise the altitude like I was there. So let's see. All right, so let's give it a shot, trying to get the next vehicle into orbit here. Space center. So this is good enough. Like, there's no solar panels or anything to put out. And the name will be good enough. All right. So it's been 10 minutes since we launched that previous vehicle, and historically, I believe it was about 15 minutes after they launched that, the target vehicle, when they launched the crew. They didn't intend to launch the crew unless they knew they had a good target. So the second launch, this Titan II launch that I'm about to do, was contingent on that first launch being successful. And in our case, it was. We got it to a nice orbit. The engine behaved just fine. And so on a separate launch pad, we have this guy. Oh, right, we need to pick 2 astronauts. So I think I wanted to hire a couple, because we don't have any fresh astronauts to use. Let's see, so let's grab a pilot and a scientist, just grabbing a couple Americans. And their little pictures were an American flag, just realized that. Okay, so hopefully that cancel left it here. Yep, ready to launch. Remove. So let's plop in a new pilot, and we'll use a veteran crew. I believe that was the process they used for Gemini as well, because Gemini sent up a number of astronauts, many of them who had no flight experience at all, and I believe they had the process of pairing an experienced astronaut with a rookie, so you could have a bit of experience in the capsule at the same time you're increasing your pool of experienced astronauts. And there might have been 1 or 2 missions where they didn't follow that, but in practice, I believe that was kind of what they were following. All right. So this is where it gets a little tricky, because of course we can't launch into just any orbit. We want to target the same orbit we hit here. So relative inclination, I've already got a window up for DNR, docking and rendezvous, and hopefully I succeed. I'm saving just because I just kind of want to demonstrate and make sure this all works. And if it fails, I do plan to do a revert. All right, so we've got this ready. So already we're a bit out of the same inclination, which is which seems a little weird. Maybe I will wait the 15 minutes. So I don't have a handy timer to tell me once it's been 5 minutes. Can I go to the universal clock? Yes, I can. All right. So maybe there was a reason they waited that 15 minutes. Like, what is 15 minutes as a portion? Like, a full orbit is 90 minutes, right? So 90 div 15, so that's 1/6 of an orbit. That doesn't seem special at all to me, but I am noticing that this relative inclination, now, which might be a little suspect just the way it's calculated for a ground object versus something that's flying. But yeah, I will wait that extra 5 minutes. So let's wait until it's 27 minutes. Unless this starts to fly wildly up, I'll wait and match that my recollection of a 15-minute wait. Okay, so it looks like they're a little bit closer to each other. All right, so lighting the first stage engines and release the clamps. All right, so our astronauts are on their way. So now we want to decrease this as much as we possibly can, which is going to be tricky because not only do we want to achieve a fairly precise orbit, and a nice circular orbit, we also want to match that inclination, and that's really why I had started writing KOS or KRPC programs, because doing this consistently is very tricky, I find, and I really do like the final rendezvous and docking portion, like launching very large payloads, say with like a Saturn V, that are intended for really large lunar missions or Mars missions. I find it to be very fun. But actually getting two vessels into that original state, getting them into compatible and close orbits for docking and rendezvous, is very tricky, I find, to do consistently. So I'm going to fiddle with yaw, because I want this number to be coming down with time. And in part, kind of where we are in an orbit. I mean, I feel like it's weird to think about where we are right now as part of an orbit, but there is an orbital velocity, in a sense. Let's just bring that up. I think we might be pitching over just a little too much. All right, and bring that back as well. Let's see if even just at 0 it's coming down. Looks like it. So I don't think we'll be able to bring it down precisely to 0. Like, at least I haven't kind of done the background work to figure out exactly what I'd need to do that. Yeah, I feel like we did pitch over just a little too much, but I'll leave it for now. I don't think it's suicide. Weird, and now it's just coming down a whole ton. In practice, I can usually get that relative inclination to about 0.5 degrees, which isn't terrible at all. It would be nice to be able to get it lower or figure out exactly what bounds that. But like I said, like the larger this number is, the relative inclination between you and your target. Oh, weird. It seems like it's acting like I'm targeting that. Like, those aren't the orbital parameters of what I actually want to target. Oh yeah, I'm targeting the wrong thing. Good thing I checked. Atlas score. Come on. Don't have infinite time here. Alright, is this our craft? No. That's the same thing. Juno Explorer. Well, damn. Alright, let me just pitch up a little bit. Yeah, I might have to restart this. Sorry about that. I clearly targeted the wrong thing. And I'm sure during this part of the video people will be yelling at me. Yeah, why? I don't know why I can't see the target vehicle. That's weird. Okay, so I would expect it to say be along. Oh, there it is. All right, set as target. Yeah, now we're 6 degrees off, and we could survive our way to orbit. It's just this is not certainly not ideal for rendezvousing with that vessel. Oh, of course. And I clicked too much and lost the target. So yeah, we're really wandering way off of targeting it. So let's see if we can, who knows, I mean, lessons learned. Let's see if we can get close enough that maybe this is good enough and recoverable. But I frankly doubt it, because we've kind of wandered so far back and forth. Okay, so, engine, I should have hot staged that, but thankfully, realism overhaul, like, as long as your first stage burns out when the atmosphere is not very thick at all, it seems to be fairly forgiving to me. The atmosphere, the dynamic pressure had come down quite a bit, so that means you don't really get much of an oomph of deceleration from the air slowing us down when you have no engines burning. Yeah, let us see if we can hit this ideal, this relative inclination down to at least under a degree would be nice. And a kind of a practice thing I did last week, I was able to get it to 0.5 degrees, but I don't know if I'll be able to get it that close this time around, unless I really do some crazy things. I feel like I'm just moving too fast to be able to correct that, but who knows. And then it might also be kind of a trick of like that I don't have enough speed to actually make it to orbit, because I've been I was kind of fishtailing my way to space. But only one way to find out. So it looks like that is coming down. It's coming down pretty regularly. I might be able to pull this out of the fire and see those are the numbers that I remember. Maybe I should have added a thing here that tells me the name of my target in hindsight. Maybe I'll want to clear some of that junk. Like, there's no good reason I can't think of one to keep that Centaur dummy stage in orbit as something to accidentally target. Okay, so we're down to 2 degrees, so that's not too bad, and we still have 2 minutes of burn time left. So yeah, this might be recoverable. Okay. Yeah, matching the relative inclination and getting to orbit. You know, if this was a vehicle that had a bit more margin in it, like because these are this is a historical vehicle, like it was intended, you know, to use this first and second stage to get this massive payload to orbit. So because NASA is good at what they do, they don't leave a lot of extra capacity in a vehicle, because extra capacity is wasted capacity if you plan to be perfect. Okay, so we're pretty close to that right inclination now, which is awesome. You know, we're getting very close to my goal, which I'm happy about. So now the trick will just be, the question is, can I actually achieve orbit or not? Right now I am a little low, actually. Time to impact, time to apo. I should probably pitch up a little bit, because I want to be above 140, so I'm out of the atmosphere. And the one thing about the Gemini is, you know, you've probably seen in some previous videos, is it has some flex. It has its own service module. So even if I was just grazing a little bit of the atmosphere, as long as my my apoapsis was high enough, and I was going to coast out of that bit of the atmosphere, I'd be okay. So I should keep an eye on this number 2. One extra number for, oh, all right. So that is, it is now higher than I was getting before, but I mean, considering the terrible things that I have done, that's not too bad. I just want to make sure this doesn't go negative. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I am going to be grazing the atmosphere just a little bit on that first round. But this is close enough that I feel like we can do it. We're going to spend most of the service module's fuel, but as long as this stage gets us to orbit, then this should be doable. If it doesn't, then obviously it's not. But yeah, it'll be a long burn that I just might end up doing off screen in order to match their orbits. But I will show the setup of the burn. It'll just end up taking a few minutes in order to actually match the inclinations. 135. Time to apo is now raising, which I don't want. So yeah, we are going to be grazing the atmosphere just a little bit. We're going to be below that 140 when we achieve our stage burnout. The question is, will we be in orbit or not? Vertical speed, that is approaching 0 as we've got 3 seconds left to go. And we're in a little higher orbit on one node than we want. But that's, in practice, not the worst thing. Should be survivable. So first, let's just dump that stage. It has done its job well. Better than I did, that's for sure. And we're at 0.7 degrees relative inclination. So first, let's just get a quick calculation of, let's see, landing guidance, maneuver planner. It's not maneuver planner. Maneuver planner we may end up using, but it's Rendezvous Planner we want. All right, so it's got the data for both our current orbit and the orbit of our target. So this won't be the first burn we do, because we actually want to achieve a real orbit. But see that? So for just 0.7 degrees off, which seems good, it's below 1 degree of relative inclination, it's going to take 95 meters per second of delta V, which is a lot out of an early service module like this. Oh, and let me activate some of the nice elements of this. Turn, no, don't want descent mode on, just want to make sure yeah, the CO2 scrubber is on. All right, excellent. So they have achieved what isn't quite an orbit, because this is below 140. So we are skimming. You can see we're on the rise. We're still heading up just a little bit, and so we're getting less dynamic pressure. But you may have noticed that I wasn't looking for it, but this number might actually be lowering very gradually as we progress, because we're still skimming the atmosphere just a little bit. So I'll make sure that I get this out of the atmosphere, but this will be the next burn. So so what we've done, so we've got the Agena target in an orbit out of out of Florida, and then shortly after we used a second launch pad to put this into orbit. So in practice, you don't need the 2 pads. If you say wait like a multiple of a day or so, if you wait until that path, until Florida is underneath, your launch pad at KSC is underneath the desired target orbit, you can do that. And I think MechJeb has a launch to rendezvous option as well. It kind of makes you wait the extra day rather than doing it shortly after the first launch, which I didn't want to do. I didn't want to wait the whole day. I wanted to, in practice, kind of try to do it historically. I've never really had a ton of luck, or I've really just never used MechJeb much for a launch, for having it control the orbit, but Nathan Kell definitely uses it a lot. So, I mean, it's certainly good. I'm just not good with it. I kind of prefer to use this to fine-tune my own orbit. But anyway, we have got both the target and the active vessel into orbit. Let's pop that, why not? That's going to affect our orbit a bit because it does punch off really quick, but this is where the Agena we will be docking with. All right, I think that's about, let me check something. Extend docking guide, oh, that's cool, yeah. So that is kind of a visual guide for the astronauts to use on the way in. Let me just make sure, let's see, not descent mode, transfer, no. Control, crew report. I just want to make sure if I have an antenna on here or not. I might have, no, I don't have an antenna on here. Well, that's nice. But thankfully for this mission, I don't think that is necessary. All right, but thanks for watching RP-0. I may redo this launch in the next video. We will see if the service module still has a good amount of delta V left after I do this correction. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.